Welcome to SpyCast, the official podcast of the International Spy Museum. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Hammond, the museum's historian and curator. Every week, we explore some aspect of the past, present, or future of intelligence and espionage. A genuine 365-degree view of arguably the world's most misunderstood topic. This week, if you leave a review on Apple Podcasts or on some other platform, then send us an email with a screenshot of your review to spycast@spymuseum.org. We'll read out some of the best ones in upcoming shows. These can be accompanied by your real name and where you're from, or alternatively, use a code name and a cover story. Coming up next on SpyCast.
Some of our biggest risks were the risk of inaction, the risk of not moving in a space where our adversaries are moving aggressively was an unacceptable risk to the agency.
This week, I was joined by Jennifer Ewbank, former Deputy Director of the CIA for Digital Innovation. Her retirement in early 2024 marked the end of an over 3 decades-long career in American intelligence, a journey that took her around the world and to the top of Central Intelligence Agency leadership. Now she has turned her focus to helping best position the United States on the global stage within the private sector. Jennifer joined me to reflect upon her career in intelligence, share lessons in leadership, and discuss the integration of technology and the latest innovations within CIA operations and analysis. She was a pleasure to have on the show, and she's a loyal SpyCast listener herself. Very humbling. In this week's episode, we discuss the qualities and skills of great digital leadership, risk management and intelligence, the roles, responsibilities, and emotional toll of the CIA Chief of Station, and how the CIA utilizes the latest in technology and innovation. The original podcast on intelligence since 2006, we are SpyCast. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Well, thanks for joining me. I'm really looking forward to speaking to you.
Same here. Thanks for the invitation.
Just to begin with, tell us a little bit more about yourself, who you are and what you've done most recently, which is one of the main reasons why we're speaking just now.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you again for the invitation to join you today on the podcast. I'm a loyal listener, so it's kind of fun for me to now be here. My most recent role at the CIA was as Deputy Director for Digital Innovation. And that is a role where I led one of the 5 directorates that comprise the CIA. The directorates are Directorates of Operations. Many of your listeners will know this: Directorate of Operations, Directorate of Analysis, Directorate of Support, Directorate of Science and Technology. But many will not have heard of the Directorate of Digital Innovation, which was formed in 2015 as part of CIA's most, let's say, dramatic and radical reorganization ever. It was a directorate created in recognition of how digital tech was changing everything about how we live and work outside the intelligence community. And we kind of woke up and realized we better get to work to start bringing in these new capabilities within the intelligence community as well. But your question was broader, and I've been in the national security community for 3.5 decades. And much of that was working in intelligence operations overseas. 4 tours, as we call it, 4 tours as Chief of Station, and where I led, teams, small, medium, and large, eventually, in the collection of intelligence and in building partnerships with foreign allies and partners around the world. So, in a way, I guess you could say I came to this role that I've just recently left, the Deputy Director of Digital Innovation, in a, let's say, a circuitous path, a non-traditional path, coming from operations to digital tech. But it was a great experience, loved every moment of it. And a little disclaimer, I may slip into present tense during our discussions quite accidentally, as I've just retired from the agency a couple months ago.
And so just for our listeners, just We don't need to get too into the institutional structure of the CIA, but you've got the director, the directorate, the deputy director, sorry, and then underneath them you have the five directors of the five directorates. Is that correct?
Yes, that we have different naming conventions. So the director, the deputy director, and then we have five deputy directors for fill in the blank, the focus. So often called directors as well. So directors of their directorates.
So just to put it in context, you were effectively one of the top people at the CIA.
Oh yes, yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. So
yeah.
yes, and so at that top senior leadership level. Leading kind of large organization with a globally deployed workforce and partnering with the other deputy directors to kind of deal with all of the big strategic challenges and questions and decisions that had to be made for the agency as a whole.
And help me understand what your priorities were. So you get tapped for this job, you come in. Um, it's a very dynamic field. Like how does one approach that? So obviously you've had leadership positions before as the chief of station and so forth, but what do you do? Do you get out a yellow legal pad and start putting down, here's the five things I want to achieve in in the near term and five things in the longer term, or like, how does one approach this type of thing?
Yeah, there are lots of different ways, right? And so, um, I came to the role with a sincere, let's say, curiosity, an open mind, desire to learn, and some humility in that because I show up as the leader in this digital technology workforce, and I don't come with that deep background. I think the first time we met, Andrew, I mentioned that my last coding class, we didn't even call it coding back then, it was programming, but my last coding class was Fortran. Many people wouldn't know what that is, but if you've got like an old industrial control system you need worked on, maybe I'm your person, I don't know. But it involved punch cards and then delivering punch cards to a computer center. And then overnight, my compiled program would be delivered on a dot matrix printer printout. And so that was obviously not going to be very helpful in 2019 driving digital technology. So I did come with a real sense of humility. And in fact, within a week or so of arriving, the directorate had its big annual event. And unlike any other part of the CIA or the intelligence community, we had a day long, we called it the DDI experience in lieu of a traditional government, let's say, all hands meeting, where you would come and people would throw up PowerPoint slides and talk about strategy and do a year in review. Instead, it was very much like a tech conference. So it was visually stimulating. It had great music, and we had great tech demos and um, let's say lightning talk style things. And then I was there as the new leader and said, okay, well now address the workforce. It was a great opportunity. But and in thinking about what to say, I just came right out and said it. You're probably wondering why the heck I'm here, right? And wondering like, what am I going to bring? And so just address that straight up. And then back to the curiosity piece, there was a very intense period of kind of introductory meetings with teams. It's a huge place. It's a huge workforce. We've got thousands of people all around the world, and it covers. And maybe I should just recap that for folks. It's enterprise ITs, global secure communications, cybersecurity, data policy, strategy, artificial intelligence, machine learning, open source intelligence, cyber collection, cyber analysis, all the engineering efforts that underpin these things, plus a training and education role for the entire agency for digital tech. And so that's a lot to digest, right? So it was a lot of briefings. And I quickly did change the way that we approached all of that because I was not going to be, the technical program manager in that role leading such a large workforce. And in efforts to provide thorough briefings, I would get 59 PowerPoint slides. And, somebody wants a 2-hour meeting to go into a deep dive. And okay, that's okay sometimes. But what I quickly came to realize is that, and this is where I saw an opportunity to kind of frame how the work would be done, is to really step back and think about two big things. And that was one, the big why. Like, why are we doing this? Because we're down in the weeds on some tech program that's really important, but it's not really connected to the why. So why are we doing this? What are our adversaries doing? Where do we need to be, and what do we need to develop to solve problems today? What do our colleagues in the field need right now? And so the big why was a piece of it, and then a vision. Like, what is it on the horizon? What's our aim point on the horizon? What are we trying to be, and how do we get there? And so I tried to shift the focus of those discussions at that senior most level to really, you know, emphasize the why and the vision, and then how do you get there. And I think those were two aspects of kind of the change that I sought to bring to the directorate, arriving as a, let's say, operational leader into a technology workforce. That, plus, as I've mentioned already, a sense of urgency, and a desire to solve problems quickly.
And for people out there that are leading teams at whatever level, I'm just wondering how you approach that as well. So you come into this job, a very big job, involves a lot of moving parts, a lot of dynamic things going on in the sector. Um, so, like when you come into a position like that, on the one hand, you want to listen to the people that have been there. You want to have some kind of sense of humility. You want to brief me, get me up to speed, help me get a feel for things. But then on the other hand, you also don't want to be, you don't want to come across like, I don't really know what I'm doing. Please tell me what I'm meant to know. Uh, and then there's also that. Well, I want to get some quick victories on the boards to inspire confidence in the team that things are moving in the right direction. Versus, I'm going to, not make any major decisions just now until I've got a thorough layout of the field. So, for people that are out there that are leading teams of any size, like how did you approach that kind of trade off between listening and action?
No, it's a really insightful question, because particularly in a space that's moving so rapidly, right? It's a really dynamic part of the intelligence mission. It is a constant state of flux. You frankly don't have the luxury to wait around until you have perfect information about everything. And if you do that, if you're standing still at any moment, then you're falling behind because your adversaries are moving really rapidly. So you have to be able to make decisions and move even while you're refining a strategy and refining your long-term vision. Um, and I found that it really wasn't that difficult for me, to straddle that line between humility and a genuine desire to understand and appreciate the important work of the officers who worked for me, and to having a vision of where we need to head. I didn't pretend, my vision wasn't, let's say, I wasn't going to sit down and draw the OV1 architecture for the CIA's information technology ecosystem for the year 2030. I was not going to do that. But I had a vision for what that needed to be. It needed to be simplified, it needed to be defensible, it needed to be agile, we needed to be around the, like, I knew what those things were. And so it was, in fact, a pretty natural partnership. And one thing that I hadn't mentioned, so coming to this role, and perhaps it's one of the reasons I was selected, um, a bit through serendipity along the way, I had the opportunity to lead DDI teams around the world, in several locations where I was chief of station. So, leading teams, learning about their work, appreciating them as people and as professionals, but not actually trying to tell them how they're going to build a network, or how they're going to conduct a cyber collection operation, or how they're going to write their analysis. There's a nice balance in there. And so, in essence, what I try to do is take that humble, personal approach, but with a clear vision for the future, and elevate that to the larger enterprise level. Is it how everyone would do the job? Probably not. But then, we're all different people. And, I'd long since learned that the best thing you can do when you're a leader at that level is to be authentic, really require authenticity to build trust. If you don't have trust, you don't have anything. So for me, it worked.
And I'm just wondering if part of the reason why you felt so comfortable doing that was, I guess, if you're an operations officer or just even working in intelligence more generally, you never have a completely saturated information environment. You always have to proceed on the basis of an imperfect information environment. So therefore, that's kind of second nature. I'm just wondering if you think that fed into it in any way.
I think that fed into it a great deal, in fact. And so, leading whatever team and whatever level, and whatever location around the world for the CIA, there are two things that are constants, no matter what you're doing. And one is just as you've said, Andrew, is you have to be able to make decisions with imperfect information. Intelligence isn't about knowing exactly what's going to happen. I mean, you have those moments, but that's not it. It's about delivering a decision advantage to our policymakers. Decision advantage doesn't mean that I can tell you precisely what's going to happen and when. You never have perfect information. And so you have to be able to move still. You can't be paralyzed by a desire to seek that last detail when, particularly in digital tech space, like the world is moving rapidly all around you. So yes, in operations, but I think it extends beyond. It extends to the analytic work. It extends to support and technology. You have to be able to move with imperfect information. And then the second piece, and it's really just the flip side of the same coin, which is fundamentally the CIA's work is all about risk at some level. It's about understanding risk. It's about accepting the risk. It's about mitigating the risk, but moving nevertheless. And so those two things together, I think when you apply them to the digital tech space, are really relevant. And one thing that I should probably add to this, because it doesn't come up very frequently in literature that I've seen and podcasts, videos of things that I've watched or conferences that I've attended, there, of course, are all sorts of ideas on what is good leadership, right? We can probably quote all sorts of fantastic literature about what makes a good leader. All that stuff is probably true. I would add that there are a few things that are necessary for digital leadership. And I have to say, when I came in 2019, it used to drive me, bananas every time somebody would throw the word digital in front of something else, because I just thought, okay, you're just making stuff up. But in fact, digital leadership turns out to require a few different kinds of skills in order to be successful. And that was, the ability to think creatively, to not be stuck in some sort of let's say, the rut that people have created ahead of you, the ability to take risks, to embrace failure as a natural, okay, say, stepping stone towards some big success in the future. Um, the an inclination, let's say a predisposition, to seek integration of capabilities, because you have to be able to work across tech silos, and you have to be able to work with mission partners in operations and analysis and elsewhere. You have to be able to communicate. You have to have trust. You have to understand what they need. Um, all these things have to come together in a way that's not quite traditional leadership. So integration and failure and innovation and creativity, all that is really, really necessary in the digital tech space. And it does require some unique skills. And interestingly, when I reflect on a life in intelligence operations, those things really are emphasized in operations. It's about integration, it's about operational creativity, it's about urgency, it's about accepting failure along the way, because you will fail. It's a lot of those things. And I think they had direct relevance to leading in the digital tech space.
So you mentioned risk and the inherent nature of risk in the intelligence enterprise. So here's a question for you as well. So with risk, either as an operations officer or being the director for digital innovation, how do you calibrate your approach to risk in those situations? Because so yesterday here at the Spy Museum, the staff had a briefing on our pensions. And the closer you get to eventual retirement, the more money you want out of international stocks and the more you want in bonds, for example. So bonds, like you could see, for example, CIA leadership saying, we want someone to come in to be the director of digital innovation who's going to be a safe pair of hands. We don't need recklessness. We don't need to lose stuff. But then you also, to just keep your money in bonds, it means that you're not accumulating. So you could also have an approach where it's like, let's get somebody in who's going to take gambles, who's going to really make us surge ahead. But then there's there's cost to that as well if it doesn't go right. So how do you, I don't know, either as a case officer or when you were in this role, like what was your approach to risk? Like what would your portfolio be like if you want to put it like that? Would it be, I'm going to go for volatile international emerging markets, or I'm going to stick with bonds, or I'm going to have a diversified portfolio? Sorry to put this in pension
No,
terms,
it's
but
an interesting it's an interesting framing, Andrew. And so it is a different type of risk, but they're common threads. So if I look back on my life in the operational world, there were moments when it was literally the risk was somebody's life, and so you felt that deeply, and I still feel that today too with all the amazing people I worked with over the years, are foreign spies, and being responsible for their well-being, potentially their life. That really crystallizes your views about risk and taking every measure you can to mitigate that risk to protect the person that you've sworn to protect. So that's one kind of risk. Coming to the technology world, it was interesting translating decades of that operational risk management into a very different environment. And so I I quickly came to recognize, or at least quickly came to articulate and advocate that some of our biggest risks were the risk of inaction, and that the risk of not moving in a space where our adversaries are moving aggressively was an unacceptable risk to the agency and to our intelligence mission, which includes our spies around the world and our analysts and our technologists and our support officers, and you name it. And so here we are trying to do this really critical work and building, in essence, the future of intelligence. And every day doing that against the backdrop of very capable, aggressive adversaries. And I'll just name one. Our most capable and our most aggressive adversary in the digital landscape today is the People's Republic of China, with the greatest level of resources, the most sophisticated capabilities, with the strongest support from government, with the most ambitious plans. All of it aligns to represent tremendous, tremendous challenge for the US government. And so, if I came in one day and said that I wanted to, this translates into programs and people and money and all that at the big enterprise level, right? Um, and I said, well, I'm gonna continue spending, let's take $100 million a year for some legacy capability that delivered something that was really useful in 1995. What I used to point out to people was that was an active decision to not build the thing you need for the future that's going to win this competition with our adversaries. And so you're going to need a better reason than momentum, or at least just, kind of maintaining. And so I looked at risk, I think, a little differently than some people in the technology workforce did. They looked at risk, not everybody, but in terms of contract execution, delivering capability that was secure. All those things are, very, very important. But we needed to be secure and deliver things rapidly, and we needed to be able to churn and create the next new thing if we wanted to buy down what was the big risk of losing this competition with our most capable adversaries.
And so, would there be a sense that, the Directorate of Operations and analysis have been, operations and analysis have been around for quite some time. So let's just think about this as the case officers, the operations officers are the infantry. They're out there. They're doing what they've always been doing. And then we have the analysts. That's like the artillery. They're sort of a bit more distant, but it's very important that they do what they do effectively. So was there a sort of sense that the Directorate of Digital Innovation was the invention of the tank? Like, this is the new place where the battle is being fought. This is the new technology that we have to master. It's not a perfect analogy, but I'm just trying to get a sense of, is some of a lot of the competition and the action, the other things are a bit more stable because they've just had more time to be settled. But this is a new, like the Wild West. This is a kind of a new battleground, a new place where things are being fought over. So this is actually where a lot of the action is beginning to move. It's always going to stay in the other places, but it's increasingly moving to this place.
It's two things at the same time. So, as you've described, yes, it was the new thing. It's no longer the new thing, but it is the thing, right? You think about cyberspace and everything that's happening there, and everything's happening with research and development in digital tech. So, artificial intelligence, think about quantum computing, think about AGI in the future. All this stuff is happening today, and so it is the place where we are competing. We're going toe to toe with our adversaries every single day. So that is true. At the same time, however, um, in order to do the operational mission, in order to do your analytic mission well, it actually is an integrated mission now. It's not something separate from digital tech. You have to have those capabilities and those people sitting side by side in order to succeed in what one might characterize as one of the more traditional lines of business. So today it is more difficult than ever to be a case officer, an operations officer, working, in some capital around the world, trying to collect secrets about the plans and intentions of our adversaries. And so it is super challenging in this world of ubiquitous sensing and big data analytics and all sorts of other things that are working against you every single day. And so you have to have every advantage when you hit the street. And that means partnering with, frankly, a lot of people from the Directorate of Digital Innovation. It's data science, it's cyber collection, it's open source. Open source is a huge piece of the CIA's mission now. You have to have all of that stuff to give you every possible advantage. And it's impossible to think of it as separate. It has to be integrated. There was a time when for decades at the agency where, and I know I lived and worked that, where I was a case officer and operations officer, went out to do my thing, and occasionally, somebody would come and sprinkle technology over the top of my activity, and that is not the way it can work anymore. It has to be deeply integrated, and that same goes for our analytic work. Same goes for, frankly, for business operations, just the business of running a large, complex agency. The efficiencies, the automation, lots of stuff that has to happen. It's no longer separate from, it is, integrated with.
You mentioned being a station chief in different places. So I'm just wondering, can you tell our listeners how that works? Does it work like, so in the State Department, you get some people that become a regional, they're known for being they're a regional kind of ambassador. They could be an ambassador in 3 different Arabian countries, for example. And then you get other people that might be, they do Germany, they do the UK, they do Russia. They're a safe pair of hands and they're sent to different places and there's less geographic coherence. There could be other skill sets that people have. So, like, how does that shake out for the CIA? Do you tend to get a regional focus, or is it completely random, or does it depend on your level of competency? I know it's probably a combination of all of them, but maybe you could just help our listeners understand. I know you can't name the places, but just help them understand a little bit more about how that shakes out.
It's a good question. And so, we tend to grow up in the organization aligned to usually a geographic region, sometimes a functional region, a functional subject. So our mission centers are regional or functional. And so officers grow up for a while in that environment. So naturally, you will tend to gravitate there as you get to a more senior level and you're ready to become a field leader, let's say a deputy chief of station in a small place is your first time. Um, so my first chief of station role was, in fact, in the geographic region where I'd spent my time recently. And so that does happen. A lot of things come into play. Do you have subject matter expertise on the country, the region, the issues that that they face. Sometimes it's the issues, less so than the geography, because the issues kind of transcend, where a country is. If you are an expert in counterproliferation, then maybe you'd be in lots of different places around the world where that mission is most relevant. If your expertise is in counterterrorism, frankly, that applied almost everywhere. It still does today. So, do you have the subject matter expertise? If you have the language capability, that was always a plus, a leg up. But we are very good about training officers in language. We have, I think, the best language training program in all of government, at least that I know of, um, to prepare our officers to be able to do really complex work in a foreign language. Um, it's also competitive, right? So it's going to depend on how well you have done your work to date and the reputation you have as a leader. So it's not a matter of completing certain prerequisites and then voila, you'll be a chief of station. It's completing certain prerequisites in order to be considered at the table, and then it is a competition. And so any number of officers are going to apply for the jobs, and as you might imagine, some are going to be a lot more popular and interesting than others. So it's it was the case decades ago where people tended to stay in a geographic region for a long time. So let's say I was an Arabist. It was the case decades ago where I would stay in the Arab speaking world. I think that's less so today. There's a lot more kind of flow across geography and across subject matter. We encourage people to have broader ranges of experience. Certainly, post 9/11, the terrorism fight drove a lot of that too. Because it didn't matter where you served, you were expected to serve the terrorism mission too, as we all wanted to and needed to. So I think that also contributed to the broadening of the backgrounds for officers going into chief of station roles. But if I reflect on the places where I've been chief of station, they were places where I had geographic expertise, and with the agency's support, good language skills.
Okay. And final question before we flip back to digital transformation. So I'm just, when you were talking earlier about the foreign spies that you have worked with, that you've recruited and ran and so forth, it made me think of this book that I came across years ago called Sleeping with Ghosts. And it's by a war photographer called Don McCullen. And he used to keep all of the negatives that he shot in boxes under his bed. And he said that, it was almost like he was sleeping with ghosts because all of these negatives followed him around. So I guess it just made me think, is there, this is something I've never heard discussed anywhere. Is there some part of a case officer's psyche where you keep these people and you clearly can't, talk about them and write op-eds about them and so forth, but it might be you, there might be a very small number of other people that know about them. Um, is there some part of a case officer that carries around all of the spies I've recruited? What happened to them? Where are they now? I know that I can't probably go online and start like doing open source intelligence on them. I can't compromise them in that way, but there must always be part of you that's wondering, what are they doing now? Are they okay? There's ethical parts involved. So I'm just wondering, is there some kind of sleeping with ghosts, sleeping with spies kind of analogy that could be made? Is that something that case officers discuss? Maybe not the names, but maybe just the general sensibility?
I love that question, and you're right. I haven't heard that discussed much. I've jotted down the name of the book here because now I'm going to go read it. Um, but absolutely, right? It's interesting because you carry those people with you for a lifetime, and the commitments that we make to our sources, spies in common parlance, um, those are commitments for a lifetime. It's a commitment to do everything we can to protect them, as they've agreed to do something very important and potentially highly risky in order to help the United States. Um, you never forget that. And so it is true. You think about them from time to time for a lifetime. You wonder, how is he doing? Where is he? Has he retired from, his secret career? Did he retire and leave without being compromised? Is he happy? Does he have a family? Um, all these things, and the second part of that is that no officer will ever, I don't know, get over the sense of heartache they feel when a spy is captured and executed. And there have been a number of those over the years, as you would know as an historian. And what's lost in that story is the personal relationship, the personal piece. There are officers who feel it deeply, who will never lose that feeling. They feel it deep in their heart. Just the heartbreak of that tragedy. And so that feeling is what propels officers, particularly those who've experienced that horrific um, tragedy, somebody else in their orbit. Right? If they've experienced that, as you can imagine, their commitment to the mission, commitment to compartmentation, the commitment to security, the commitment to everything, which was already conducted at a very high level, is only intensified. Um, and you're right, you could never go online and Google someone's name, um, because, of course, that has the potential to compromise that person. And you're always left wondering. I will share one quick vignette. I had the unique opportunity in my career um, to go back many, 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 many years later and see a source that I had worked with intimately, closely for a number of years early in my career. And I had the opportunity to go back and meet him at one point, and it's the intensity of that was really striking on both sides. On his side, on my side, it was like seeing a close family member again after many, many, many years. And just being able to recount everything that happened in our lives and with our families and the rest of it, it's intensely personal, something deeply, deeply felt. So I guess that's a really long way of saying I suppose we do sleep with ghosts for the rest of our lives. Yeah.
And that's something that you think about. You can remember your first, your last, your favorite, the most
I can
difficult
remember
one.
them
The
all.
let's pivot back to digital transformation. So I think it would be interesting here to, if we try to go through each component of what you were overseeing and trying to drive, it would probably be um, redundant. So I think it could be interesting to focus on one or two examples. Maybe we could look at AI or something like that. Like tell us what's going on. So we spoke about it maybe at a higher level, but tangibly, like what would that involve? Like what would you do? Like help us understand what you would do with your job.
Oh, yeah, goodness. Well, it's like leading any large organization. There's going to be a lot of, people and resources being on your calendar most days. And one of the um, wonderful things about the role was that I oversaw officers who themselves were very senior enterprise leaders for the agency. So the chief information officer, the chief information security officer, the chief data officer, et cetera, and their counterparts leading other parts of our mission, who themselves had authorities and responsibilities for the agency as a whole. So it was a really unique dynamic. Um, but I'll maybe pull the thread on a couple of things. One, let's say open source. And so the open source world's been really fascinating, and it's the subject of a lot of discussion these days, certainly with industry, certainly with academia, and just interested people out there who track such things. Um, and it's a great example of successful digital transformation because open source intelligence and the intelligence community today, and CIA is the leader there. Um, it's really all about advanced digital capabilities today. So years ago, we had people all around the world who would listen to radio broadcasts and watch television broadcasts and read the newspapers and translate things, and then send that material back to Washington, and Washington would compile it, and then we would deliver, in essence, kind of open source newsletters each day to ambassadors and to political officers and others who were serving around the world in embassies and then, of course, to policymakers in Washington. And that worked extraordinarily well. We had unparalleled subject matter expertise. But again, with this transformation as of 2015, there was a realization that was never going to scale with the way open source information was then being made available on digital platforms and digital capabilities. We would just never be able to scale because the volume was going up literally, an exponential curve. So we could never hire people at an exponential curve to manage that flow of information. And so it became the ground for experimentation, for development of new capabilities on rapid timelines, and doing so in an environment that was relatively, I would say, more secure because it was open source. We had less risk involved, if you will, and that allowed a lot of experimentation and the occasional failure and the ability to move really rapidly. And so open source led the way in terms of applying artificial intelligence and machine learning to every step of the process that you could imagine. So let's say finding that open source material on a digital platform somewhere. So ingesting that, transporting that, identifying a language, doing machine translation, doing summarization, applying the same sorts of things to radio and TV. So it's audio to transcript, transcript to translation, translation to summarization, whatever it might be. You've got all these steps in order to deliver information on a rapid timeline to consumers. And so at the very beginning of, I would say, the big large language model explosion, right? So everyone remembers 2022, ChatGPT hit the press, and the most rapid adoption of any new technology in history is any new digital technology. The numbers of people who signed up within the first 6 months, just extraordinary, right? But we were right there in the mix in the open source world, playing with large language models and generative AI, and on a very rapid timeline, I think unfathomable in government, developed a capability that was called Osiris, and it's been written about publicly, that helps analysts and others digest and consume massive amounts of information. I mean, the downside to having so much information available and so much information then presented through automation and AI is that you have so much information presented, you can't even possibly consume it. You can't work the same way you worked 20 years ago and come in each morning and read every article about fill in the blank your topic, because you just could never do it. You couldn't have the capacity. So there needed to be a new way to consume that information to make sense of it. So there's not just a flood, right? And so this capability really did an amazing job of summarizing events, things that are happening with just massive amounts of reporting behind each event. And then allowing analysts or others to engage with that information through a chatbot to ask questions, to help refine our thinking, to challenge our thinking. And so all of this really fantastic capability that was, to our understanding, the most advanced use of a large language model anywhere in, certainly in government and potentially in industry at the time. And that's the story of open source these days. It's really that, how do you make sense of it all? And so I used to use this phrase quite frequently in speeches and in presentations because everyone talked about data, right? Data's the new oil, data's the new this. A colleague had data's the new bacon. I never really understood that one, but data's fine. You could drown in the data, but data's not information and information's not insight. And so the magic was in taking data and creating insight. And for us, that really required human machine partnering and AI with machine. And so open source is where, we're really able to play with the new capabilities and move quickly and do some extraordinary stuff on rapid timelines. And all of that experience informs and enables the stuff we're then able to do in more secure environments after that.
Wow. And I'm just wondering, in this, let's just stick with the example of open source. So we've got one to hang our hats on. With the example of that, would there be like generational differences in how open people were to this type of stuff? Or what you were saying to me earlier was that actually you would be surprised. There's also some people that see that this is necessary for the mission. So they might not be digital natives, but they kind of get it. Help me understand, if there were any, you know, generational dynamics at play here.
Absolutely, there were differences there, and so on both ends, on the open source production end and on the user end, so the consumer end. So within open source, of course, there were those who were quite wedded to the legacy way of doing work. And trust me, I loved it. I was one of the most avid consumers, and I just loved the expertise resident in the amazing people who worked with us all around the world. And so I felt lost in a sense when that approach changed dramatically, and we emphasized technology instead, which helped us scale. Right, we never would have been able to scale, and we never would have succeeded during the pandemic had we not already done this hard work of moving largely to a technology based capability. Um, but on the consumer end, it was also the same, because today we talk about open source intelligence, so int, OSINT as the int of first resort. We talk about that a lot. And we used to say that, but I think it was never realized that way. There was still, for decades, there had been a bias toward secret information. Somehow, if it was secret, it was better. Somehow, if it was secret, it was just more relevant. And so we never presented intelligence that way. We never said, oh, well, here's a secret report, therefore you should believe it. But it tended to have a lot more weight than the open source information. And so, with that dynamic for decades, of course, there was a certain sense that it was a secondary capability. Unfair, completely unfair. But again, just as I was describing earlier with this dynamic between, say, operations and digital tech, or analysis and digital tech, where the complexity of the mission is driving that integration, driving organically the partnership that has to happen in order to achieve success, the same thing is happening in open source. Because again, think about how hard it is to collect real secrets today. It's really hard. So, what's the natural thing you need to do? You need to maximize the exploitation of open source information to narrow the range of secrets you have to go out and collect. And so, no one wants to do high risk, high cost collection, whether it's espionage, human espionage, or technical collection in a secret way, if that information is available somewhere openly. And a lot of information that used to be collected clandestinely in the old days is available openly if you know how to find it and if you have the expertise to present it. And so, again, the mission is driving this organic expansion of the role of OSINT. And that is a wonderful thing, because the expertise that is out there in the OSINT community is really just unparalleled. And I hope others would agree that we have finally achieved the vision of OSINT being the int of first resort.
Mhm. And how did because you're still in your position when the war in Ukraine breaks out? How, as much as you're able to tell, lots of stuff has been released in the public domain and so forth. So, as much as you're able to tell us, how did that affect what you were doing, or how did that accelerate some of these revolutionary or evolutionary changes, or how did that affect the nature of OSIN or emerging technology? Huge open ended question, interpret it whatever way you think is the best way.
Well, let me frame it one way, and then I'll pull the thread on a few of those capabilities. So, um, in my role as deputy director for digital innovation, um, there was no major challenge, no major issue around the world. Let's say one of our priorities where DDI was not at the table literally for every update, for every conversation, for every strategy meeting. And so whether it was Russia Ukraine or Israel Gaza or what's happening, tensions in the Taiwan Strait or the latest terrorist threat or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever is the priority on the calendar is going to get the senior leadership's attention and time because you need to understand how things are evolving and you need to guide the collection and the analysis and the rest of it. So DDI was a critical partner in all of those discussions. And specifically looking back on Russia Ukraine, there was a lot of talk about the role that cyber would play in that conflict. And certainly we've seen this in any number of publications, I'm sure, but um, there was an expectation that Russian cyber capabilities would play a larger role than ultimately they did. Now, to be fair, I mean they did a lot. They continue to do a lot in cyber space to undermine Ukrainian capabilities. Ukrainians are constantly under attack, one kind or another, in cyberspace. And certainly, Russian collection has posed, a threat as well to military plans and intentions. Um, but I think it's fair to say that analysts and observers expected it to play a slightly larger role than it did, and in a way, that's also a testament to the success of Ukraine's partnerships with a number of allies. I won't name everyone and maybe go into specifics about what we have and haven't been able to share with them. But um, those partnerships that helped Ukraine develop really exceptional um, defensive capabilities and analytic capabilities to understand what's happening. And so, um, has digital technology played an important role in Russia Ukraine? Yes. Have intelligence service, allied intelligence services done their part to help? Yes. Um, Open source is really interesting, and I'm sure you were thinking of this when you asked the question. But and I'm always happy to be proven wrong because I'm sure I'm wrong quite regularly. But it may be the first conflict on the world stage that everyone worldwide was able to watch unfold through open source, right? So everything from people's cell phone videos to the data collection and analysis that was released publicly to you just name it. And it almost didn't matter. If you had a cell phone and connectivity somewhere on Earth, you could see this conflict take place. And that's an extraordinarily different environment. And so, of course, our open source enterprise and partners across U.S. government are mining that and collecting and synthesizing information, just this flood of information, which is also giving really rich insight to analysts in on a really rapid timeline that you never were able to do in the past. No conflict in certainly my tenure in the intelligence community, you could ever do that. Um, it's been an extraordinary capability, and it has enriched our collection and analysis in pretty exceptional ways.
And there's so much other things that we could dig into, but we're out of time. So,
Whoa.
final question. So, Charles de Gaulle used to like to quote the Greek poet Aeschylus, who said, "To wait on you have to wait until dusk to see how splendid the day has been." So you have to wait until the darkness comes. That just makes me. I bring this up because I'm just wondering. You've recently concluded a long career in intelligence, and I know you've managed to take a break and take some time off and so forth. So I'm just wondering: is there any kind of like insight or clarity or focus that you've been able to get on your career now that it's concluded? I mean, it's a new chapter in your life and your career, but I just mean your career within, like, the CIA, for example. Is there anything that sort of came to you when you were, I don't know, hiking somewhere or just taking a break? Is there any kind of like insight that you've derived? Thing
Yeah,
to ask.
it's an interesting question, and I take the quote maybe as an opportunity to reflect on the career that I had the honor of pursuing. And I came to the careers through kind of almost accidental channels. It wasn't something I had planned, and sort of fell into it, and I found something that was really special and right for me. It really tapped into so much of what both my mind and my heart wanted in life. I wanted purpose. I think everyone needs purpose. To feel that sense of deep purpose is special. And I'm not sure that everyone gets to do that in their life. And so I'm grateful to have had that opportunity to feel that what I did and what my colleagues continue to do every day actually does make a difference. It makes a significant difference. And of course, there's the whole standard thing that people say, our mistakes are public and no one ever knows about our success. And that's okay. We hire for people who don't require a lot of external validation. I didn't need people for 30 years to tell me, that I was successful or exceptional or in any way. I had the satisfaction of seeing our success and knowing that I made a difference. And so, leaving a career that you love and by any standard, a career that you might call an extreme career, something that is just very high levels of, adrenaline and dopamine, all the stuff in your system. Leaving that when you do have it as one of your deepest loves in life is hard for people. It is very hard for people. That separation can be very difficult. And so, for me, what I focused on, it was just time for me to try something new, right? And so what I've focused on is just gratitude and appreciation for all the opportunities I've had, for the extraordinary people that I've met, both in the service and all around the world. I've met people on 6 continents in this line of work, and just extraordinary opportunities that I never would have had in life. And so when I think about my career, it's really just at this point with a deep sense of gratitude and humility that I had the opportunity to do something so exceptional and meaningful for me for so long. Not everyone gets that opportunity in life.
Hmm. Wow, this has been such an enjoyable conversation. Thanks ever so much for your time, Jennifer. I've really appreciated it.
Well, Andrew, I appreciate the opportunity as well. I appreciate the invitation. I really love the work that you do there with the podcast, and I will continue to be a loyal listener. Although I probably will not listen to my episode.
But you must.
Thank you again, Andrew.
Thanks so much. Thanks for listening to this episode of SpyCast. Please follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up on next week's show.
Both the House and the Senate Select Committees on Intelligence is that we are the people's eyes and ears on some very potentially controversial activities. That's who we are.
If you go to our page at thecyberwire.com/podcast/SpyCast, you can find links to further resources, detailed show notes, and full transcripts. I'm your host, Andrew Hammond, and my podcast content partner is Erin Dietrich. The rest of the team involved in the show is Mike Mincy, Memphis Von III, Emily Coletta, Emily Renz, Afu Anokwa, Ariel Samuel, Elliot Peltzman, Trey Hester, and Jen Ivan. This show is brought to you from the home of the world's preeminent collection of intelligence and espionage-related artifacts, the International Spy Museum.